into our rainbow studio with another episode of Appalling Twistianity. And while we're going to resume where we were in the 18th chapter of Devarim, which is Deuteronomy, with the introduction of Dod by Moshe, as he speaks of a prophet who will come from the midst of those listening to him, which would have been the children of Israel, whom they were instructed to not only listen, but respond. We know that this is God telling us right from the beginning that the most important person to listen to and respond to would be his beloved Son, the actual Messiah, the former and returning King, our Savior, Dod to David. And it's somehow missed because, Twistians want to apply this to their mythical Jesus. And with all evidence to the contrary, Muslims and the Quran, even Allah wants to apply this to the pedophile and rapist, mass murdering terrorist known as Muhammad. And so there are a lot of people laying claim to this. I've given, I guess, the opportunity. Wookie would probably claim it too, and he'd probably have more right to it than either of those two. But nonetheless, it applies to Dod, as do almost all prophecies apply to Dod in one way or another. And so while this is Appalling Twistianity, and we're discussing something that is vital in the Torah, the more we understand God's test for a prophet, the more we understand Yahweh's great devotion to, focus upon, and love for Dod to David, the more readily we can denounce the myth of Mr. Christ and the dead God on a stick. So we're going to resume, take it from the beginning as it relates to this particular prophecy regarding Dod. We'll try to go through the preamble of it a little more quickly since we have already devoted 2 shows to it. But here we go. It says, a prophet. This means someone who is inspired to speak for Yahweh from among your midst, from your brethren, which means that he will be a Israelite, and if he's going to be from the very heart of Israel, he would have to be a Yehud of the tribe of Judah. Similar to me, which means that he is going to be one of the very rare player prophets in God's story. He would not have had to say similar to me, and he could have left it just at prophet if all that you needed to know is that he was going to be a Israelite and a prophet. Because the one thing that would make Dod and Moshe different than the others is that they were very active characters in the ongoing plot of God's story, as well as prophets. Whereas you look at people like Hosea and Zechariah, Malachi, Yoel, and Yirmiah, the list of pure prophets is quite extensive, some 20 of them, but yet quite different than those who actually play significant roles. Another individual who is a player prophet would be Eliah. He acted in a very big way in repudiating both the religion and the politics of Israel. The difference is here that Eliah could not be read because he personally didn't write anything down. So that's going to be a criterion here in a moment. So a prophet. From among your midst, from your brethren, similar to me, Yahweh, it says, will raise up and position to take a stand and establish you and affirm you. So this completely eliminates any possibility that even if Jesus were real, which he wasn't, he was made up by Paul in 52 CE, it couldn't be Jesus because, well, there is no mention of Yahweh in Christianity, and this individual is being raised by Yahweh. Second, it cannot be Muhammad. Well, for a billion reasons, Yahweh doesn't endorse pedophiles and rapists and mass murdering terrorists who are anti-Semites and perpetrate apartheid and genocide on Jews and who speak for Satan. So it's not Muhammad, not the same individual. Allah is the antithesis of Yahweh. And of course, this says that he is going to do something extraordinary to establish God's people. And there's really only one person who did something extraordinary to establish and affirm Yisrael, and that would be Dowd. He not only united Yisrael and defended Yisrael and brought Yisrael into their capital of Jerusalem, but in his second and third lives, he offered his corporeal body to fulfill Passover, to open the doorway to life, and then he, on his soul, carried our guilt into Sheol to perfect us, and by depositing our guilt where it could never be retrieved or seen again, which gave us the opportunity to become firstborn children in God's family. It goes on to say, to him, I want you to actually and continually listen. So this is an individual who is going to say things that are essential for us to know. And of the prophets that Yahweh has sent this way, while there are a number of them that had profoundly important revelations, there's only one of them that we could devote ourselves to constantly listening, and that would be Dowd. He has this marvelous expose on how to observe the Torah, for example, the 119th Mizmor. He has so many brilliant insights as to how we should live our lives in the word pictures that he has painted through the Mashal Proverbs. And of course, his Psalms are absolutely magnificent in terms of explaining what he was going to accomplish so that we might live forever. So to him, I want you to constantly and continually listen. Devarim 18:15. This is consistent with everything which you requested of Yahweh. It's so sad, Israel, that not only did you do what follows, but you don't even have the character to admit it. And by not having the character to admit it, you put yourself in a terrible position because you don't recognize your current dilemma. This is consistent with everything which you requested of Yahweh, your God, in Choreb, during the day of the assembly, when you said, never again let me hear the voice of Yahweh, my God, nor let me see and witness this intense fire anymore at any time, lest I die. Devarim, Deuteronomy 18:16. You told God to shut up and go away. I mean, what's the matter with you? Why would you do that? And after doing it, and time going by, and you've seen all of the horrors you've had to endure as a people, and you still haven't rectified it. So if you want to know why Yahweh spoke through his prophets from this point on, why he chose the likes of me to communicate to you, it's because you told him to go away and shut up. You never wanted to see him or hear from him again. So you can't be picky about who you got and who he chose to speak through when you told him to go away. He's certainly not going to come to one of you. Not after that. So here we are. It's repulsive what you did. Therefore, Yahowah said to me, that's actually better. And they have appropriately conveyed their preference. So why did God say it's better? Because you were obnoxious. Because he didn't want to be around you anyway. And because he's first and foremost as an advocate of free will. You get the opportunity to do what you want done. And if you don't want to hear from God, you want him to go away, well, he will. And guess what came in his place? The Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Macedonians. Well, we had the Philistines there for a while. I shouldn't have skipped over them. You got them again now, but unrelated to the old Philistines. You had the Romans 3 times. You had the Roman Catholic Church. You had the first Muslims that were so murderous. You had the Ottoman Empire. You had the Crusaders. Oh, my goodness. You had the Holy Roman Empire that subjugated you for so many centuries. I had anti-Semitic Europe and the pogroms, and then it led to the Holocaust with the Nazis, and you got Muslims again, and even Marxists today. You don't seem to have a problem with every foe. You certainly see lots of them. Why not give Yahowah a chance for a change? So the solution to you telling Yahowah to go away was that he was going to choose the people through whom he is going to speak. So, you ought to not be picky as to whom he has chosen. You don't seem to like Moshe very much. You told him so many negative things that he finally says, I don't want any part of you anymore. I can't even deal with you anymore. I don't understand you. I don't like you. You're obnoxious. I want out. I'd rather be dead than have to deal with you. And then look at Dode. Here he is, God's son. He's the Messiah. And you rebelled against him. You wore him out too. You're trying to wear me out. Maybe I'm not as bright as the rest of them, and it takes me longer to figure out maybe this job is impossible, and I'm going along just because, well, I'm not smart enough to figure out that you're impossible, and I'm going to stick with it because I happen to like Yahowah, and I happen to like Dode, and I think they deserve better. So maybe I'm doing it for them. And maybe I don't even have to like you to do it for them. Maybe that's the case. Anyway, he says, I will raise up and establish a prophet for them from among their brothers, similar to you. This is now God speaking to Moshe, which he has to speak through Moshe to communicate to the rest of the world because you told him to shut up and go away. So he's, when Moshe's mouth was moving, it's God's words that are coming out. So he says, I will raise up and establish a prophet, someone to speak for me, for them, from among their brothers, similar to you. And I will put my words in his mouth. So, ladies and gentlemen, when God just said, I'm going to raise up a prophet similar to you, and I'm going to put my words in his mouth, would that not mean that Yahowah was putting his words in Moshe's mouth? I think so. And wouldn't that mean that when Dode conveys his beautiful Mizmor lyrics for his songs and his the stirring prose of his word pictures and the Mashal Proverbs, that he's speaking for God? I think so. When Dode expresses the realization that 1,000 years after he wrote the words that he was going to be crucified by the Romans to fulfill Passover, and that he would carry our guilt into Sheol via his soul, finally being able to leave at the end of Matzah to celebrate firstborn children as the firstborn. Do you think maybe it was God that spoke through him? What about when Dowd visited Daniel and he gave him that timeline as to exactly when he would fulfill Chag Matzah in 33 CE? Do you think that Yahweh might have been speaking through him? I think so. And since you were told to listen to him, clearly he's speaking for God, isn't he? And I will put my words in his mouth, and he will convey them to you, saying everything which for the benefit of the relationship I instruct him. Devarim, Deuteronomy 18:18. And it shall come to be that an individual who will not listen to my words, which he shall declare in my name, I myself will seek it of him, and I will hold him accountable for it, requiring it of him. Devarim, words, Deuteronomy 18:19. There's only one person that Yahweh would make this statement, because if you don't listen to what Dowd had to say, particularly as he explained that he would, as the Messiah and the Son of God, fulfill Pesach Matzah B'Kodim, even telling us when he would do so. If you don't listen to him and recognize that he made these claims, that he gave you an eyewitness account of crucifixion 700 years before crucifixion even existed, 1,000 years before he endured it, you don't listen to him. And you don't act accordingly to Yahweh's inspired testimony through him as a prophet, then Yahweh's going to say, I'm requiring of you what he has offered, what he has done. Where is the doorway to life open for you if you didn't respond to Dowd? Where is the removal of your guilt if you didn't capitalize upon what Dowd said and did? How are you a signatory of the covenant family if you have not followed along and listened to the Son of God and capitalized on what he has offered? God's going to require these things of us if we're going to spend eternity with him. And these things were given by the gift, the charity, the contribution of this man, Dowd. Pretty outstanding, huh? Now, you want to pretend that this is the dead God on a stick? So how are you supposed to listen to him when he didn't write anything down? And how are these people supposed to listen to him when he would be claim that they killed him? And how would this work out when he died by crucifixion, but in no association of any kind with Passover or matzah or unyeasted bread, and therefore for no purpose? Are you supposed to say, well, gosh, you can't get into heaven because you weren't crucified? Think it through. What if you don't do what Dowd did as a now? No, just take it to Muhammad, because they claim this passage. If you don't do what Muhammad did, you can't get into heaven. What did Muhammad do? Well, he was a pedophile. He was incestuous. He was a rapist. He was a misogynist. He was a mass murderer. He was a terrorist. He was a thief. Which of those do you think that Yahweh was going to require of you? He was a false prophet. Probably not either of those would it be. But what Dowd declared, in Yahweh's name, in my name, he says, I myself will seek it of him. So Dowd spoke and wrote his mashal and his Mizmor, all in the name of Yahweh. Even if we were to forget for the moment that pretend Jesus never wrote anything down, no indication he ever said the name Yahweh. So he didn't count. And clearly Muhammad had a whole bunch of gods: Aluza, Alat, Manat, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, and Allahi, Allahu, Allahim. So, not him either, right? Only one person. It's Dode. And if you don't capitalize on what Dode has offered through Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, you don't also celebrate Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, remembering and capitalizing on what Dode has accomplished for us, well, then it's going to be required of you, and you're not going to have the receipts. So this is among the most provocative and least appreciated declarations in the Torah. To set the scene, Yahweh had asked Moshe to gather the children of Israel so that he could speak directly to them, the purpose of which was to affirm that everything Moshe had been sharing with them had indeed come from God. That's what he wanted to validate, so that they would know for certain this came from God, versus their Talmud, which didn't come from God, versus the New Testament, which didn't come from God, versus the Zohar, which didn't come from God, versus the Quran, which didn't come from God. He wanted a means to assure the people that Moshe was speaking for him. But from a human perspective, the meeting had been an unmitigated disaster. Rather than reassuring the Israelites, Yahweh had, I guess, unintentionally intimidated them. Not that would have been hard, but he also clearly irritated them. The brilliance of his presence and the tenor of his voice were too much for them. And particularly being as irascible as they were, with a really miserable attitude, they just didn't like being in proximity to such grandeur and goodness. It is also likely that they were afraid that God was going to read their minds and peer into their souls and recognize they were not all that far removed from their brethren who had conspired to craft and worship that golden calf. Now, this may sound shocking, but it is nevertheless true. Most men and women want nothing to do with Yahweh. They prefer fake gods, who by design are similar to them and accepting of them. If you can make up your own God, your God is going to love you, right?
Their world, yes.
Yeah, that's right. You make up your own God. Your God will love what you love and will hate what you hate.
I found when people find that there's 3 destinations for a soul,
yes,
they have no problem knowing it's over. They would rather do that
yes,
than take any kind of time to get to know who Yahweh actually is.
correct. Yeah, that's right.
If they see it as a relief.
Yeah, if they see it as a relief. Okay, well, whew.
I'm not going to hell.
I'm not going to hell.
But other than that, don't bother.
Don't bother. Yeah, I mean, that is by intent. That response is one of the responses Yahweh is looking for, because you've got probably 100 billion humans that have come and gone this way, and 100 billion people would be a little large for a family. So we can be certain that God's not looking for 100 billion people to try to relate to. And so the easiest way to get a manageable number that he can have a close personal relationship with throughout eternity is to whittle it down. And that way, these souls, they don't have to be tormented in hell. I mean, hell would be overpacked. There's no black hole big enough for that many of them. This is perfect. They get exactly what they asked for. Totally fair. Works out well for everybody.
It blows me away.
Well,
why somebody wouldn't choose Yahweh, I don't understand.
Well,
I don't understand it from the beginning. The whole 10 plagues, they saw it all. They were there from the beginning. 2 frickin' people after
6 out of
40 years.
Out of 600,000.
Out of 600,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 2 were of the original group. 2 were allowed into the promised land. So it just gives you an idea is that for God to make that choice, He's not looking to maximize the number of people that are part of His covenant family and spend eternity with Him in Shamayim in heaven. He is looking for those who are like Koleb, those who are like Yashaya, those who have courage and conviction, those who are saying, hey, let's just go. Yahweh's with us. This is going to work out. This is going to be great. We can go do this. He wants people who are doers, who have the conviction of knowing that Yahweh is God, and that when we have Yahweh as our Father, we're protected. There's nothing for us to worry about. We can come down here, for example, turn on the lights, turn on the camera, and say, go. Because there's nothing for us to fret. We know Yahweh. We can share openly what we know about Yahweh, and we're delighted to do so. Now, for most people, why they don't want to proceed, when you tell them, for example, that Jesus never existed. He was a myth created by Paul in 52 CE, and I can prove there's not a single eyewitness account, and there's not a single contemporaneous account. And if he was supposed to be God, he would have, oh, by the way, prophecies that pertain to him, and there are none. He would have a Hebrew name, and he doesn't. He would have a Hebrew title, and he doesn't. And there would have been someone who, and then between the literate Romans and the literate Hebrews, particularly with us having so many thousands of manuscripts to this period, like in the Dead Sea Scrolls, with so many manuscripts from this period, there'd have been somebody that wrote down a contemporaneous eyewitness account of what happened. And if he were supposed to be so spectacular, God-man, then he would have written something down. All of Yahweh's prophets did. You mean to tell me the most important of them couldn't write? Didn't bother to write? Waited 40 years for the first person to write, and that person wasn't even around? Wasn't even in the province of Judea at the time. So the whole proposition is completely ludicrous. And the only way they can validate their man God is to rob David of everything God said about him. Everything that is positive that you would claim about Jesus is either stolen from David, the person being spoken of here, or stolen from Dionysus, the resurrection and man being a god.
The very premise is that God died. Hello? How stupid can you be? God cannot die.
And if you were to die and you want to go to heaven, what is the first thing you have to get rid of? Your body. Your body is what's keeping you here. Your body is why you can't be perfect. Your body is why you can't get off this rock that we live on. Bodies are incredibly hostile to any movement into eternity or to perfection or to empowerment. That's just dunderhead stupid. And do you think that it's possible for a God no bigger than a man to create a universe of a couple of trillion galaxies, each with a few 100 billion stars? How would that be possible?
Exactly.
Come on. But, one of the things Paul realized, if you create a God in your image, your God's going to like you. Paul's God, I'm positive Paul's God said, yep, you're my God. You're my apostle to the world. No problem. He made up his God. His God's going to say whatever he wants him to say. Of course, even though that Paul's letters were the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament, and in terms of the order they were written, the first 14 books are all Paul's letters. Mark would come 10 years after Paul died. Luke was Paul's propagandist, and his book of Acts and Luke, both written as letters 10 years after Paul died, 40 years after these events played out, when he wasn't anywhere near anything that occurred like this and wasn't even in proximity to somebody who was near. It's not even good hearsay. And here's God telling you it's all about Dowd, the only person that fits this. And how hard would it be to figure out when there are more things said by Dowd that are pertinent to our lives than by any other? When God says, he's my chosen one, if God's saying he's my chosen one, and you just contemplated this very, very special person, who do you think is this very, very special person if God's got one chosen one and it happens to be Dowd? If God says, he is my son and I am his father, he says it 3 times and he says it to nobody else but Dowd, who do you think might be this person that you ought to listen to? If God says, if you don't capitalize on what he has done, then I'm going to hold you accountable for what he has achieved. He is the Son of God. You can't be the Son of God if you don't capitalize on what he did. Therefore, you can't enter his family. You can't enter his home. If God says, that's the guy that I am anointing and making my Messiah, and he says it 3 times, why would you believe a misnomer that had a name that's not even mentioned anywhere in the Torah and prophets? Why would you believe that he is, and not even a Hebrew title, but why would you believe he's the Christ when there is no mention of a Christ? And we're told by God himself that Dowd is his Messiah. I mean, I've said this before, but I've just got to ask, how stupid do you have to be? There's 3 billion people that believe the idiocy of the Christian New Testament and believe that there was a Mr. Christ, and yet it is utterly stupid. There's no validity to it whatsoever, and the truth is profound, and it comes from God's lips. Well, I guess most men and women just prefer their gods, as puny and pathetic as they are, as malleable and contradictory as they are.
There's more money and profit in maintaining the lie.
Well, certainly there's a lot more money and profit in this crime that is Christianity, and also you can create for yourself, if you're a power-hungry individual, whatever control mechanism you want, if you claim to be the authorized agent of an imaginary God. So they do. Religion has been very, very profitable to them. That's why God says he hates religion. Now, a God befitting the people is, well, easy enough to make. Humankind has devised millions of them. Get enough people to believe based upon the monumental edifices erected to them, and sculptures and scriptures attributed to them, and a God is born. They grow in stature by building religions around them, by telling the skeptics that they're going to be tortured in hell. And if they don't believe, and if they're compliant, of course, that they'll be rewarded in heaven. The more popular they become, the more godly they appear.
Your life sucks, but believe what I tell you, and you'll be okay in the end.
Well, yeah, not in this life. No, not in the end of this life. No. That's the whole thing that's so absurd about these things. Yes, you're going to suffer, and you should suffer for these gods because, well, you have to suffer for the king and queen and for the people in power, the popes, and all that stuff to live lives of utter luxury. You all need to suffer because, well, you need to give us the money. And you need to be devoted to us. Yeah, and I know that life is miserable for all you lowlifes out there, but you just suck it up, and you'll end up, if you're compliant to us, big little holy water on it, and you'll go to your reward is in heaven, your next life, not in this life, your next life. In Islam, life has to be miserable here. You got to give up all your money. You got to give up your freedom. And you have to go off and kill and die. But hey, it's all going to be good in the end, because even though your life's miserable here, you're going to get your babes in paradise later. Trust me, I'm going to give it to you later.
I can't wait to see the looks on their faces when the truth finally comes out.
Oh, and you're going to say, how could you have been that stupid? Surely, are you just fundamentally evil, or are you just genuinely that stupid, or both? Throughout human history, in every race and place, men and women have done this very thing, shaping their culture and lives around the very gods that they have fabricated, with the most prevalent today being Jesus Christ, and second to him, Allah, or Allahi, Allahu, Allah. And where there is a false god, the real God is not welcome, because he threatens to undermine the very essence of who the faithful have become. You tell a Christian Jesus Christ is incompatible with Yahowah, and they would prefer to cling to their precious Jesus. Jesus is Lord. Jesus is King. Jesus is coming back. Jesus died for me. And you say, well, why wasn't there a single prophecy regarding him? Why wasn't there a single eyewitness? Why didn't he write anything down? Why did God say everything pertains to David? And that David did everything that you're attributing to the Jesus, except for the pagan stuff of being a God man who dies and is resurrected. Except the really ridiculous stuff, right? Oh, there's just no end to stupidity. Albert Einstein actually says, two things appear infinite to me: how dumb people seem to be, and he says, I also suspect the universe is infinite. The Israelites of the Exodus, like Christians, Muslims, and Haredim today, want a God they can fashion to accommodate them, to value them. One they could make like the best of themselves, one who would listen to their prayers and would tell them that they were the only ones who were righteous. The religious have had no interest in learning what pleases Yahowah, listening to him, or allowing God to make them more like him by becoming acceptable to him. Nearly 3,500 years later, literally nothing has changed. As a result, the people pleaded with Moshe to intervene, to silence the voice of God, and to remove his light. Well, that would normally be considered as a giant stride back into Mitzrayim, where God was nowhere to be found, even although there were plenty of pagan gods and goddesses for them. Even a return to Babel, where truth and lies were mixed together for Satan to be able to confuse through religion and politics. It is what Yahweh had anticipated. He knew it was going to occur this way. This is the reason he asked Moshe to engage with him to liberate his people. It is the reason that God was revealing the Torah through this lone individual rather than 270, 700, 7,000, 70,000, or 700,000 people. It is why Dode was chosen. It's why I am here. And yes, Yahweh knew long before the Exodus began that it would be this way. He told us regarding the fourth day of creation that there would be a greater and lesser luminary that would draw your attention to the Moed and to the very timeline of God so that you might be able to enter his light. Individuals are very far, or very few, I should say, and very far between, who listen to Yahweh, who accept him on his terms. Fewer still engaged doing as God instructed. Even over the last score of years, while there are many covenant members who have served with me, some to publish, some to promote, some to convey online Yahweh's message. And some have come and gone. When it comes to the translations, when it comes to the insights that are derived from them, when it comes to being the core of the Yahweh blog, the books, these programs are written and spoken by the two of us, Yahweh and Yada. As was explained in Yeshayah, Isaiah 11, regarding the Towrah, this branch that would give the fallen stump and tree of Yisrael new life. With some notable exceptions, this is consistent with the way Yahweh has engaged since these words were spoken 3,470 years ago. The distinctions in the way Yahweh is communicating today are attributable to the realization that there is so little time remaining for Jews to respond prior to his return with Dode, and therefore, without a backup plan, should we fail, I have benefited from the counsel, comprehension, confidence of the seven spirits of Yahweh, including the very spirit of Yahweh. This is not a time for failure. We must prevail, and God's going to assure that result. Further, this close to the fulfillment of Shabuah, Towrah, Kippurim, and Sukkah, prophecy isn't near the option that it was previously. Because previously, well, from the time of Moshe to now, we'd have, 3,470 years from the time of Dode to now, so that we could validate that he spoke for Yahweh because his prophetic testimony turned out to be precisely true. We'd have 3,000 years from Yeshayah as he gives us this sweeping counsel on God's antagonism towards Judaism and his love of the covenant, to the extent that he was going to enable the Towrah to awaken his people at this late moment in time. We had 2,700 years to validate his prophecies, and we have the great Isaiah scroll from Qumran, which dates 2,300, 2,400, or maybe even 2,500 years ago, all verified today based upon the prophecies that he made. But when we began together as a team, now just 24 years ago, Our first endeavor together was to protect Israel by exposing and condemning the menace of Islam. And at that point, there's no reason to interject prophecy into a book devoid of prophecy. And from that time, we then excoriated Christianity, which is, why would you interject prophecy into a book for which there is no fulfilled prophecy? Again, with the Christian New Testament. So our next encounter, and one that we have invested 20 years on, was rendering the text of the prophets as completely and as accurately as possible to deduce understanding, insights, comprehension from them. So you don't have to be a prophet to study and understand and then convey the message of the prophets. But ultimately, when there are tens of thousands of insights, when you become the first person to actually perceive God's story from beginning to end, how it began, how it will end, and all of the important strokes and milestones along the way, then you actually are a prophet. Because while you're not saying, I'm going to predict something that's thus says Yahowah, you're the first person to see what Yahowah conveyed to us in a manner that it all fits together in one beautifully framed and focused portrait. And in that way, our collaboration became prophetic. And it's also prophetic because there are 1,000 prophecies regarding the role that we would play together. So while God began with a student who became a teacher, a man who would serve as a witness, as this collaboration grew, the realization became true that just as Eldad, the Almighty's beloved, was a prophet, so was my Dod, his herald, his right arm. So this has been our modus operandi together. We're going to provide the world with answers that no one has previously deduced just in time for everyone the world over to capitalize as the final 4 Moed Mikra are fulfilled. Now, we're also told that the Nakar, this observant foreigner, will become better informed, will be more accurate, more convincing than anyone who has claimed to speak with God, and that would certainly include the rabbis. And he has to prevail with skeptical Yehudim who have undergone centuries upon centuries of indoctrination and a culture that has been carefully crafted by the rabbis to extend their influence. And I have to use evidence and reason to prove that that has always been counterproductive, which is what we've done, to warn Jews not just to be skeptical of them, to distrust them, to abandon them, to discredit them. And as we know, Jews have been trained over the years to distrust Goyim. I mean, look what the Goyim have done to the Jews between the Amalekites, the Egyptians, the Philistines, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Macedonians, the Romans, the Arab Muslims, the European Roman Catholics, the Goyim Marxists. Look what Goyim have done. And so they're skeptical of that way, but the fact is that God began the story with Goyim. Adam, Towrah, Noach, Abraham, Sarah, Yishak, Jacob, all Goyim. God began the story with Goyim. And he's going to conclude this story by allowing, enabling, choosing a Goy to awaken the comatose Yisrael. Kind of poetic in a way, isn't it? The evidence that would be marshaled together in this collaborative effort would therefore be irrefutable. It will be overwhelming, and it is. I heard Rich last night. We were having what turned out to be more of Asher's swim party and than Wookiees, and the one of the guests, he just says, I'm here because he's obviously the choder. He is the Nakri. The odds in favor of it, when you do the calculations and all that is said, are beyond overwhelming. That is all the way to the point where it is conclusive. And we're told to listen. This is what God wants done. This is why I understand the Torah and prophets, and the religious are all blinded and haven't a clue what they actually say. They can read the words, but they can't process the message. Same thing is true with the prophets. It's again, it's a prophetic thing, but if all manner of people are reading the Torah and prophets and they can mouth the words, but they don't understand any of the message, and then one guy comes along and he's imbued with the 7 spirits of Yahowah, and for the first time, he not only accurately and completely conveys the message, but explains it. Everything about it that's important to you. Isn't that the very essence of prophecy? To see what others have not seen and to convey it accurately and reliably to you. Since 99% of what I'm revealing is obviously contrary to accepted religious beliefs, and since most of the insights and conclusions I am sharing are unheralded, no one has perceived them previously, it's relevant to understand that the prevailing myth that is stabilizing societies insists that the popularity of something, which is universally upheld, must be true, while conclusions of lone contrarian individuals are therefore wrong. This is the whole idea of Roman Catholicism's heretic. But truth has never been popular. Ever. This means that advocating Doge's role as the Messiah and the Son of God, fulfilling the Mikra, is tough for most people to accept, even when it is confirmed by God, even when God himself says, this is true. So Yahweh had to intervene, had to make it possible for me to do what no one else had done, to understand the central thrust of his message, and then have the compassion, the courage, the wherewithal to convey it to you, to compose 35 books which validate it, improve it, authenticate it, and then to look you in the eye and say, here's the truth. All religions are false: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the truth is that Yahweh is God's one and only name. His beloved son is David. And he came in 33 CE in year 4000 Yad to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim, so that the door to heaven and to life was opened, so that we are perfected on unyeasted bread, and we have the opportunity to become members of God's covenant family as a result of Bekurim. And that the next Moed Mikra to be fulfilled is Shabuah, and that will occur 11 months from now. at the time that we enter the period of Jacob's troubles, which will finally conclude with the ingathering of olives of Israelites on Towrah, September 23rd of 2033. And that the sacrifice of the red heifer will cure the ills of this adulterous woman that is the mortal remnant of Israel in time to be betrothed to the returning king, which is David, who is going to return as brilliant as the sun in Yahweh's presence on Yom Kippurim in 2033, year 6000 Yah, so that we can all re-enter the Garden of Eden together. That's the truth. It's rare. It's uncommon. But God himself states it over and over again and validates it. It is actually irrefutable. If you are a practitioner of evidence and reason, if those are your guides, that's where the words will lead. Now, there are hundreds of prophetic references to what Yahweh and I are achieving together. In fact, so many hundreds of them that I am certain that now that number is at least 1,000, because we find it everywhere. The prophets through whom these revelations were conveyed have consistently been accurate. So, on behalf of his people, not only do we prevail, neither Israel nor the earth would survive if we didn't. You want to root for us. Even if you don't want to capitalize on what we're offering, you want to root for us, or the earth simply disappears. There's no purpose to life. Yahweh doesn't return. Satan prevails. Without a meaningful return of Yehudim to Yahweh as a result of Yada Yahowah, which really says it all, doesn't it? Yada Yahowah, to know Yahweh. There would be no reason to fulfill any of the remaining mikre, which would nullify the human experience. There'd be no Shabuah harvest, no Teruah gleaning, no mortal remnant of Yisrael, no perfecting the adulterous woman, no betrothal and return and homecoming on Kippurim, and no re-entry into Eden. Wouldn't be anybody there. Whether it was Adam or Noach, Abraham or Jacob, Samuel or Dode, Zechariah or Malachi, or now with the Bashar Herald, Yahweh has been consistent. With very rare exceptions, he has chosen one or two individuals with whom to engage and through whom to communicate with Yisrael and with the world. And he seldom, if ever, works alone. And what he is working toward is establishing his family, the Bereth covenant. Yahweh does not want to intimidate us or to have anyone worship him. He is an advocate of free will and wants nothing more than to be our Father. We approach him through evidence and reason in our minds by choice. Not because he is so visible and loud that he cannot be denied. It is the reason that we were created in the first place. This explains the covenant. It embodies his approach and intent. He speaks through men because he wants to be with them. Now, in this particular prophecy, God predicted an individual who would be a Israelite, and he would be a prophet, of which there were fewer than 40, with less than half of them leaving a written legacy scribed by their own hand. 20. Of them, the two most prolific, the only two real, genuine player prophets were Moshe and Dode. They are the two mightiest Zeroah. Now, of course, there was also Shamuel, Yashayah, and Yirmiah, and they would leave an indelible written legacy to explain the past and to predict the future. Yashayah, Ben Nun, Hosha, Chabauk, Yoel, Shalomo, Amos, Zechariah, and Malachi also left impressive written reports. Each of these prophets is invaluable and undeniable because they were inspired by God, such that everything they wrote has been shown to be true. Although we must acknowledge that most of what they wrote has not been understood and has typically been misconstrued until now. Of these men, and I say men because Nabi, in this case, is the masculine form of the word, only one rises to the level of Moshe, and that's David. Moshe announced the Mikre, and Dode fulfilled the most important of them. Moshe explained the Bereth, and, Dode embodied it. Upon his return, Yahweh will be arriving with his chosen Mashiach, our Melech, king, our Ra'ah, shepherd, his Ben, son. It is to the lyrics of the Psalms and the prose of his Proverbs that God wants us to listen, that God himself listens. Of the three Zeroah, the predicted one cannot be Moshe because, he is announcing the arrival of another. It cannot be Jesus because even if we pretend that he existed, he wrote nothing for us to read. So we can't listen to him. And it can't be Yada because he is a messenger and clearly, he is a prophet in the sense that we have discussed as God has delineated his nature in this regard. He does not measure up to Dode. Moreover, he is, by the very definition of the terms that Yahweh has chosen for him, an observant foreigner, a goy. So he is not from your midst. Although there is a subtlety which shows him to be related in a way. First of all, speaking of the Nakar, the prophet Yashayah was inspired to convey that he was also a son. And in one of the most profound prophecies regarding him, he is called the man who comes out of Edom to save many. Edom is from Esau. Esau was Jacob's brother. It says that the family will be brought together and healed. As for Yashayah, my favorite, Yirmiah, Zechariah, et al., they were many and not one. Moreover, of these potential candidates, only two liberated and saved God's people. And one failed. Moshe. He didn't even get them into the promised land. Now, to say that he failed, it wasn't his fault, it was their fault. And the case of Dode during his first life, it wasn't his fault, it was the fault of the Israelites. They rebelled against him, as they did against Moshe. Even to this extent, Yahweh failed. He tried to lead the people. He tried to communicate directly to them, and they told him to shut up and go away. That's not exactly winning, is it? So here we are. Yahweh is revealing himself through individuals, now like Dode, rather than to large gathering of illiterate people throughout time. He is actually pursuing what is a better approach, and particularly for him, because he gets to choose the people through whom he communicates. We've had this lovely relationship for 24 years. And, there are lots of people that say, well, you're a real jerk. People call me that all the time on X in particular, and quite often on Facebook. But Yahowah seems to like me. He likes rogues. They pick people he likes to work with. And who is the world to tell God, you shouldn't like that kind of person. He's really gritty. He's abrasive. He tells me things I don't want to hear. That's the kind of person God likes to work with. So God gets to work with the people he chooses to work with. He makes the choice. All we're doing is responding to him. So God gets to work with the people he likes to work with. He doesn't have to pay any attention to the people that aggravate him. And the people he chooses to work with are always literate. They're always articulate. They always write stuff down for lots of people to read, to be disseminated in a very broad manner. So it's better for God. It's better for the people, because now you don't have lots of conflicting voices. You've got one message from the one God, always delivered the same way throughout time. It's a better approach. Better for everyone. No matter when or where you're born, you can know Yahowah, you can read his Torah, you can attend his mikveh, you can participate in his Bereth covenant. In this manner, we're all given direct access to God. Everyone's able to study the revelations of his prophets whenever time permits. I've laid it all out in the 35 books of Yada Yahowah. You know exactly what God said. You know exactly what he meant to convey to us. You know how to capitalize on what God is offering, and you know what he's asking from you in return. His method is fair, and that everyone the world over is offered access to him now. With 8 billion smartphones and about 8 billion people, and most people having access to somebody, and translation tools ubiquitous, and with English being the lingua franca of the world, even among Jews, for those that are sufficiently smart to be able to process the complexity of God's message, he's available to them. The truth is available. And so, you have this chance to relate. And I know the naysayers will say, well, what about that person that's living in the depths of the jungle of the Amazon or of the Congo? That's not fair to them. Well, with 100 billion people that have come this way, and the realization that God says, my message is going to be accepted by thousands, which is 1 in a million, even with the population that we have now. What were the odds that if that person became literate so they could read, if that person became, was educated to have the tools to be able to think this all through, that they, and not they, when Israelites who are literate, who have all the tools, who have been in the proper position to think all this through, haven't processed it, and you expect that person in the Congo or the Amazon to say, well, yeah, why not? I'll figure it out. It's just not realistic. And what's the point? If the point was that there was heaven and hell and nothing else, and if you didn't figure it out, you were going to hell, it would be unfair to the person in the Amazon or the Congo that was illiterate their entire life and therefore had no chance of knowing God. But that's not the answer. The person in the Congo, like every animal on earth, has a degree of free will, has their life to live as a gift. They get to live it. When it's over, it's just over. No penalty. There's no reward. It's utterly fair. And If you lead people away from God, do so deliberately because you're religious or ultra political. Well, you're going to get what's fair too. You're going to be led away from him. Fair's fair. And if you're among those who have devoted the time and the energy not only to learn what God is saying, and you capitalize on this opportunity he is providing to you, and you don't fight him and you don't antagonize him, and you embrace his name, you accept his son, you attend his Moed Mikre, you agree with the terms of his covenant family, then you're rewarded, as you should be. It's as it should be, which is a wonderful place for us to end this program, as it should be. Thank you so much for listening. I am Yada, Craig Winn, and this has been the YAHOWAH blog.